Witches, thank you so much for joining me today. So in today's video, I am so excited. I have a very special guest. I was able to find some time to sit down and talk to Lena, the Jesus Witch, and she just was able to educate me a little bit more about her practice and how she works with the Bible and with the Abrahamic God, which is definitely not something that I have a whole lot of perspective about. So I wanted to bring that perspective to my channel. I am actually going to be appearing on her podcast later, I think next month actually. So I'll make an announcement about that when the episode goes up, of course, but please do me a huge favor, just go follow, just say something nice. Check out her podcast. She's also on TikTok and Instagram and stuff. So all of that is going to be linked in the description down below. So without further ado, we had a fantastic conversation. I was so blessed and so lucky to be able to talk to her. And yeah, I'll just let the video play. See you guys at the end. Bye. Hello everybody, welcome back. I have my wonderful guest here with me today, so I will let her introduce herself. And if you could, just tell me a little bit more about yourself, your practice, and where we can find you on the internet.
Okay, hello. My name is Lena. I go by Lena the Jesus Witch on TikTok and on Instagram. So kind of straightforward. So who I am and what I do is basically I am a witch who works with Jesus, and I educate other people on Jesus witchery, Christian witchery, all that good stuff. And yeah, do you want me to get into my background of what
Sure,
led me
yeah.
here?
Anything you would like to share? I'm here to listen and learn from you and learn about your practice. I think we definitely have different paths. I feel like I
Yeah.
left the church when I found witchcraft and kind of found more foundation within paganism. I discovered Wicca at a very young age, so as soon as I found that, I was just oh, bye, gotta go, and I zoomed away. So it's cool to talk to people who maybe didn't have that experience, because I think it's important to note that that kind of experience, maybe going away from the church and discovering other stuff, isn't universal amongst all witches, and I think it's important to talk about that kind of stuff for sure.
Yeah, well, I definitely relate to the as soon as I found witchcraft, I was like, bye-bye church, because I definitely don't align with the church, nor do I feel like the church really um, conveys Jesus's message the way that Jesus wants his message to be conveyed, if that makes sense. But basically, just in short terms, my background is I grew up Catholic. I like to say I grew up casually Catholic because my parents weren't super big into the Catholicism. My mom really loves God and has a relationship with God, but they were the parents that would drop me off at Sunday school and then leave and go home. And I'm like, well, why do I have to go to Sunday school every week if you don't, kind of thing. My mom was like, well, because I already did, so now I don't have to. And I'm like, okay. But
It's fine.
it's fine. Okay. I went to this Catholic church, and quite honestly, I don't feel like it was super traumatic or anything crazy for me. I feel like the worst part about being in the Catholic church was that I was in the same church as a lot of the kids that would bully me in school were in. So they would extend that to church, and that was really great. And then, because I'm a woman, it was obviously my fault that I was being bullied, obviously. So, I eventually ended up getting kicked out of the Catholic Church because one, I was being a problem because I was getting bullied there. And two, I started to question things at a pretty young age. They would just very specifically anti-LGBTQIA doctrine really, that never made sense to me. Even as a small child that didn't really understand it, I was kind of but they're born that way, so why would God create something that he doesn't like? And they're but it's a choice. I'm but I don't think that. So I kind of got kicked out of the church because of that. So that really sucked for me because I love God, I love Jesus, and I just didn't really find him there. So I started to search for him on my own, going to non-denominational Christian churches, prosperity gospel up the wazoo, gotta love all that stuff. And then I ended myself up in a Christian cult. It was called the International Church of Christ. I have no shame about blasting them on the internet. 100% a Christian cult. And that was where the Bible was used against me in a way that I've never seen before. And the way that they manipulated and cherry picked the Bible while accusing everybody else of being cherry pickers really opened me up to this very different world. And when I started to kind of see the red flag, the biggest red flag for me, again with with the LGBTQIA community, was this they played this documentary by this guy named Guy Hannon, and like his name is actually Guy, which is funny. But he is a member of the ICOC, and he identified as same-sex attracted, which is what they call being gay in the church, because they want to make it sound
like weird.
Right. Yeah, I guess. I'm like, I don't know. Okay. Like, that's an interesting way to put it. But he did this whole documentary about how in the ICOC, we don't support the LGBTQIA community, but we support their right to exist. But we don't believe in that, but we support their right. But it was like he's at pride events holding up signs about how God loves you, that he's talking to kids about how they need to like change their ways at the same time. And I'm like, oh my God. And I remember coming home from that and just like sobbing hysterically to my mom, being like, I don't understand this, because this is like supposed to be a loving church, and God's supposed to be loving. And if God's not like, if God's creating people this way, then why aren't they like, you know, whatever. And, you know, luckily my mom has a pretty progressive view for a Catholic, like of like this kind of stuff. She's like, Lena, this church you're in is weird. I'm like, no, it's not, it's the true church. So I kept going for a little bit of time. And then eventually the real nail in the coffin for me was I was starting to get really depressed after that like experience, like seeing that documentary. Kind of started me like questioning a lot of like what I believed and like why did I believe it and all this stuff. And I mentioned to a sister, quote unquote, that I wanted to like go seek out therapy because I was having some really dark thoughts. And then she proceeded to tell me that that was Satan trying to get me away from the church. And the next week, a traveling pastor came and he talked all about how his church supported him to get therapy when he was experiencing PTSD. And I'm like, you're only being supported because one, you're a man, and two, you're a church leader. So they don't care about me, and I'm out. Like, that was it for me.
Wow. Well, you definitely have like a very story. I didn't know how like deep all of that went, but that kind of cognitive dissonance, like definitely was one of those things that like growing up, we luckily and unluckily kind of, we left the church that we were going to when I was about 12, 13 years old, and did like at-home Bible study, which was like not better because it was like a whole thing. And it was like very, like, I still kind of hate Sunday mornings and like can't eat pancakes on Sundays because it just like reminds me of all of that. But it just like the cognitive dissonance, and then the shaming when it comes to questioning the religion and like questioning teachings and like the translation of it throughout. Because I mean, how can you expect like this book to you know, in my case, I guess, like be interpreted the same way for thousands and thousands of years when the context in which these lessons are being taught is completely different, you know? So when I started questioning that, I remember the big thing that happened to me. I was actually kicked out of Sunday school because I was asking why, like, if God wanted a son so bad, he wasn't a woman, so he could just like give birth himself or like herself or whatever. And they were like, you're 7, also stop asking, like, and get out. Like, it didn't make sense to me, which I don't know why, like, I thought that way, but the way that like they shut down like immediately, they're just like, no, that's just because you're wrong. And like, that was kind of the first inkling that I was like, interesting. So I definitely relate to kind of that awakening to maybe the fact that the institution of the church is not really representative of the teachings of necessarily that religion. So I guess that kind of leads me to my next question is, which is, what does it mean to be a Christian witch? Like, what does that mean to you?
So for me, like, I personally would identify myself more as like a Jesus witch, and that's newer to me because like I kind of had this like kind of like and this might be different for other Christian witches, like, but for me, the way that I classify a Christian witch is like somebody who still believes the majority of the church's doctrine, specifically about like afterlife and like ruling of God, like, and how you worship God, if that makes sense. So like for me, a Christian witch would still believe in like the tradition of heaven and hell. They may have like more traditional views on heaven and hell, like more like everybody gets into heaven, not just believers kind of thing, but they still believe in that classic heaven and hell kind of polarity. And then for me, Christian witches would only be open to working with the Abrahamic God and with like Jesus, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that Trinity. I mean, they could also work with like saints and like angels and kind of like stuff that are also within the Christian tradition, but I feel like they have that real boundary of not worshiping Abrahamic or not worshiping anybody outside of the Abrahamic God. And I specifically say the Abrahamic God versus like the Christian God or like something else, because I want to include Judaism and Islam in the description of the God, because he's also the God for those two religions as well.
Right.
So for me, I consider myself to be a Jesus witch because I feel like I'm more eclectic in my practice. Like I believe in reincarnation. I believe in like, you know, the law of attraction. I believe in like different elements from different religions. However, I feel like a Jesus witch can work with like other gods and goddesses through other pantheons. Like I know people who work with Jesus who also work with Norse gods, or like also work with like Loki or like Greek gods or like things like that. I guess I just said Norse gods and then I said Loki.
That's okay, you're good.
I just like out of all the pantheons, I actually really like the Norse pantheon. But me personally, even though I classify myself as a Jesus witch, I feel like I have a covenant and like a promise to only work with like the Abrahamic God, the Abrahamic deities. That's just like, I feel like even before, this is so woo woo, but like even before I was born, I feel like I created this like promise with him that I was going to be that light and like that person that like kind of explained him for other people. Not that I'm like speaking for God, but I just feel like I was meant to come here to work with him exclusively so that other people could see that, you know, you can still be kind and love, love the Abrahamic God. You could still be omniscient and love the Abrahamic God. Like I believe all other gods and goddesses exist. I believe like this might be different from where like another pagan believes, but I believe, you know, that the source, that the Abrahamic God, I believe he's source, and that source consciousness, and that's what created all the other gods and goddesses. So like I find a way to bring other traditions and other pantheons into my practice, but I still focus mainly on him, her kind of thing. Like I believe that there's an Abrahamic God and Abrahamic goddess.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's so cool, because I know that, so I at the beginning of my practice, and maybe I would love for you to speak on this as well, but I felt like when I first started practicing, I felt like guilty about it, because I was like, this is bad. This is, like, I don't know, like God is gonna smite me because of this, you know. And I tried to and before I just was kind of like, fuck it, like whatever. I definitely tried to kind of keep that element of like God, and I worshipped almost like, instead of like the triple moon goddess, it would be like the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So I don't know, like, did you ever have like a time, I guess, like where you felt you were kind of warring with these two parts of yourselves, or yourself, like when you found out about witchcraft? Like, how can you explain kind of your journey into how you meshed these two together?
Yeah. So it actually starts when I have two kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. I forgot how old he was. It feels like he's so much older because he's brought me through so much. It's like traumatic with this one. He's a Virgo sun, Scorpio rising, and a Gemini moon. That's all I need to. That's all I need to say. I asked for it. I asked for a Virgo. I really wanted a Virgo, so I asked for it, but he's definitely a Virgo. And I love it. But it starts when I was pregnant with his brother, with my first son, my Sagittarius. Thank God I had a Sagittarius. I was due during Capricorn season, and I'm just like so elated that I had a Sagittarius. But he basically started with me with astrology. And I because I got pregnant really young. I'm only 20, I'm gonna be 25 this year, so I had my first when I was 18. And I kind of was like, well, like, why was this my path, like, kind of thing. And I was like, kind of like curious as to like, what about, you know, being 18 was why I was supposed to have a child. Like, what kind of like, what was he supposed to teach me, sort of thing. And I felt like astrology, I don't even remember where I like learned about it. Like I always knew I was a Taurus sun kind of thing, but I started to learn more about like the specifics of it, and like putting my chart with my eldest son's chart, and like seeing like, oh, his Mercury is my Mercury is at 29 degrees Aries and his moon is at 29 degrees Aries. So we're here to learn how to communicate emotionally together. Like, and like those kinds of things really started to get me into this path, but I was doing astrology without God, without spirit, without like doing it in a more secular kind of thing. And I was like almost believing in a more secular manner. And I started to feel like really heavy and really like quote unquote convicted. I hate that word, but I started to feel that way by like the Holy Spirit kind of being like, you need to put God first. Like you need to put God first. So that's when I joined the cult. And I was like,
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's not as like hard to join these kind of predatory groups as people think. And I want to make that super duper clear. Like, there is no shame in getting kind of like stuck in these because they're predatory, like legitimately.
mm-hmm,
Like I'm
mm-hmm.
not trying to like, you know, shit on anybody or anything for their beliefs, but like when it comes down to like the manipulation of people and of using spirituality as a weapon to control people, that's when things get really scary. And it's kind of like that metaphor of like if you put a frog in a pot, it won't jump out like as you turn up the heat or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just like that. So don't feel
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, I just want people to like recognize like this is like not as like hard as it sounds. Like it's not just like these, you know, people who like go out to a commune. It's not like
no. It was very normal people. Like I grew up with these people. Like I grew up with the people that I started going to the cult with. And I like when I met, like I say I was in a cult, I think it's actually like just knowing my life. The fact that I was in a cult is really funny and it really fits. So like I don't say it like it's like, oh, I was in a cult. No, I like it was a part of my life and now I laugh at it because I think it's hysterical. But people I grew up with, people I've known since like middle school. Like, and like, you know, me and these dudes, we were really close all throughout middle school and high school. And like, I've gone to church with them several times, like just passively, like went to their youth groups and all this stuff. So I like kind of grew up with the people there, like kind of knew who it was. And I'm like, yeah, they seem normal. They weren't normal when you get in. Like, you know, they're normal until it's not. But yeah, they're very easy. So this particular one, like a lot, so like if you go to like college, right, they love to do Bible studies on college campuses. So that's like a big thing. Like if you're in college right now and you have somebody like saying, hey, you want to come join our Bible study, ask them what church they're affiliated with first and do some deep dives on that church. If it's like the International Church of Christ or Church of Christ, just say no. Like, don't go near that. You're good. You're welcome for saving you from that pain. But you just really like be aware, use discernment, you know, like that's like something that is talked about a lot throughout the Bible, but not in the church, is using discernment to know exactly like where you're getting your quote unquote spiritual milk from. And as B said, it's very, 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 very easy to get into these kind of like predatory churches. It's not like, it's not something that's like out of the sky, you know. It's not like, I know somebody now who's going to a cult church. She doesn't even know she's going to a cult church. I'm like, dude, like you gotta get away. Like, come on.
Like, come on, no, it's fine. We're gonna.
Yeah.
No, that's so rough.
Yeah, no, but to get like so then after I basically like I was in this cult for a little while. I was in there for about like 3-4 years or so, and so I just went full on God, hardcore God, and there was like something in me that was like, but astrology, like that's like what kept like coming up for me. And not only that, but like I started to, as we like started to learn more, as I started to learn more about like the like a legalistic heaven and hell where only like they believe in the ICOC, only people baptized in the ICOC go to heaven. And I'm like, okay, so like what about like all these other people? They're like, well, they go to hell and they're tortured forever. And I'm like, do I really want to be worshiping a God like this? Like that's really like what kind of like started to like make me think. And a big like gateway back into more witchcraft things was reincarnation. And one day I like offhand, I like said to like somebody in the church, I'm like, yeah, I've always like kind of believed in my heart that I was like the reincarnation of my grandmother, but I don't know how that would fit biblically. And she's like, actually, you know, there are some evidences for reincarnation in the Bible, but they're probably fake, or like they're probably like not really, that's probably not what they're alluding to. And I'm like, wait, you're gonna like blow past this? Like you didn't just say what you just said? And that like started a whole rabbit hole of me researching about how some scholars, and like they teach this in seminary school, is that some scholars believe that the John the Baptist was originally like, he's a reincarnation of the prophet Elijah. And I'm like, wait a minute. So like there's Christians that believe this, and like don't believe in a heaven and a hell. So like, how is this all like, you know, working? So then after the whole thing happened with my mental health and like with the church, like the girl telling me like going to therapy was from Satan kind of thing, and I left like officially, I was very newly pregnant with my second baby. And he was just, this child is like so mystical. Like he loves tarot cards. He like loves crystals. Like he's like, like you say to him, Scotty, are you a witch? He goes, I'm a witch. And I'm like, okay. He's like definitely like that. So when I was pregnant with him, I started to feel this big pull to start researching that again. And funny enough, I have them next to me. But my mother-in-law and I were looking through like my father-in-law's all of his old stuff, and we found they're divorced, so he just has like a bunch of stuff in our home. And we found these were his tarot cards from the 80s. They're the Mythic Tarot by Trisha Newell from 1986. Like they're like a really old tarot deck. And we found these, and like I started shuffling through them, and Scott like started like while he was in my stomach, like flipping out. Like absolutely flipping out. And that was the day that we decided on his name and everything. And it felt really like important to me that I start reading tarot. So that's kind of like how I got back into it. And before I would do tarot, I would kind of be like, okay, Jesus, what's your message for me? And that's how I just started doing it. And it kind of like spiraled into a practice from there.
I love that. That is such a beautiful story. Like, and especially like that, to have that connection with your spirituality and with your son and stuff. That's so beautiful. Like that's so neat. Like, and I think that experiences like that are really kind of the essence of like what makes me feel like so connected to witchcraft as part of my spiritual path. When I have kind of those indescribable like feelings of knowing, like you
Mm-hmm.
what you were saying, it's like you've just felt like called to continue this and to keep working. And I think that is like in those moments is like when I find the most like sacred and like deep magic. So I just thank you for sharing that. That like made me like just so happy. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's a fun story.
So I guess like my next question would be like, when it comes to your practice, do you rely on the Bible as like a sacred text? Like how do you interpret and how do you use the Bible in your practice, if at all? Because I know that like this was actually really cool. Sorry, before I let you go. There was a Christian which I saw either on like YouTube or TikTok and stuff, and she would literally use the Bible as like a way of divination, where she would ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
And then like point and like open the book and like let it fall to whatever page and like point in the passage, which is actually something that they used to do like in the medieval times that like Christian people used to do, which is very interesting to me. And I'm like,
Bibliomancy.
here, yeah. So do you have any kind of practices like that where you are either using the Bible as a tool or maybe using it as like more of a sacred text or anything like that?
So yeah, I love the Bible. Like I absolutely love it. So when with loving the Bible as like a more deconstructed Christian, you have to understand that there are a lot of parts in there that were either added for control, made to seem more scary for control, or like, you know, there's like different things I feel like were just put in there that like weren't supposed to be in there, so that like we all live a certain way, you know, kind of thing. And also yeah, so that's basically, and I also think it's really important, like you know, as somebody who's more deconstructing the Bible, to like understand that it was not originally written in English, and trying to find as much of like the Hebrew texts and Hebrew origins of words, and like what like it's actually become really important for my practice to actually hear from Jewish people and what Jewish people say about the Old Testament and about the ways that they're supposed to believe, because, you know, like Abrahamic God appeared to them first. So if I'm going to learn about him from anybody, I'm going to be learning from them, like, you know? So, but for me, I look at the Bible as like a sacred text that was inspired by God, but does not totally come from God. Like there are absolutely passages that are in there that were man's opinion. There, you know, in 1 Corinthians 7, I believe, you could literally find verses of Paul saying, this is my opinion, not a commandment from the Lord. And I'm like, okay, well, if Paul put his opinion, at least Paul, like, he was open and honest about it. So thank you, Paul, for your honesty about saying that some of this is your opinion. But like, how do we know if Paul put his opinion in there, then how do we not know that other authors of the Bible put their opinion in there too? So that's like, I feel like a big thing too. Remember when working with the Bible, but I use the Bible. Firstly, I use the Gospels as like the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where we see Jesus, where he's like actively there as a character. That's like a guidebook for me. That's the way that I'm supposed to live, by like looking at Jesus's character. who was he? He was a giving man. He was, he healed whoever needed to be healed. He did not care about who they were. He healed them anyway, did not care. He sat with the quote unquote sinners and the least of these. So he made it a priority for him to reach across the aisle and, you know, befriend and get to know people that he may not have agreed with. You know, and overall he was just very loving towards himself, loving towards others, loving towards his God. And that was like really the most important aspect of Jesus. So for me, that's what the Gospels are. It's a guidebook, how I can connect with Jesus and how I can learn about his personality so I could be more like him. The rest of the Bible I kind of like look at as like stories, like just like basically like ancient stories that I can tell my kids of like how like times were and like what lessons we can gain from like people like David's faith or Esther's faith or Ruth's faith, like learning from them about like the essence of faith and like learning about like how to be steadfast in that, if that makes sense. But the Psalms is like my main spell book. Like if you have a feeling, there's a psalm for it and you can turn it into a spell. So it's like it's a great spell book.
Oh, that's so amazing. And it's really cool to use, because I didn't even think about that, even though I've seen other practitioners using Psalms, because I believe that also kind of, some Afro-Caribbean religions that were kind of colonized and appropriated, like, you know, when all
Yeah.
of
A lot of hoodoo traditions
Yeah,
use Psalms for very specific reasonings. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And as well as I'm half Puerto Rican, so I have a little bit of knowledge about, I'm in no way qualified to speak on this like at all. However, through exposure to it, the use of psalms is also common in Santeria, basically, in the indigenous religion of Puerto Rico. So I've seen it used in other, I don't know why I didn't conceptualize that up until now, but it's so awesome to hear that, you know, it's kind of just one of those things that is always there for you, which is nice when you're coming up with, you know, whatever workings that you are working.
Yeah. And it's like, it's really simple because like you could literally just Google Psalms for justice, Psalms for forgiveness, Psalms for love, and find one that resonates. And like, even if you're not a complex practitioner, like you don't have all the herbs, the oils, the flowers, whatever, you could just speak these words out or write it down. And there you go. You cast a spell. Like, that's it.
Affirmations or some sort of like magic charged like incantation or something, which is really neat to think about things in that way, because I've never thought about it before like that.
Well, that's like the one thing that's really unique about humans out of every other animal species, right? We have like, even if birds communicate with each other, they don't communicate through language, through word, through written text, and that's what is very like unique about us. So we can use just our words as a spell because we're the only species that has that. You know what I'm saying? So you don't need to be fancy, and I find the Bible really easy for like simple spell work because I just like flip it open, find something that resonates, and I use that as my spell.
I love that. No, that's amazing. And there's nothing wrong with that. I guess to piggyback off like talking about the Bible, do you have like a favorite story or anything about like Jesus that you specifically are like, this is like my favorite thing to talk about when it comes to, you know, the Bible and stuff like that?
So I was actually looking at that question. I'm like, I don't have like a specific favorite. One of my favorites is when Jesus was he was like just traveling with his disciples and there was a big crowd of people around him and he was like going around and healing people. And this one woman was like, if I just touch the edge of his cloak, I will be healed. And she touched his cloak and like the energy passed through Jesus into her and she was healed. He did not know who she was. He did not know why she was touching him, right? He just allowed his energy to pass through him to heal her. It did not matter who she was. And that's like a huge story for me. And like, especially like, first of all, the energy, it literally says in the Bible, the energy passed through him into this woman. Like, you cannot tell me that's not like Reiki or energetic like stuff like witchcraft in itself. So I like that story for that, one reason. And two, because he just did not care who she was. And I think that's really like something that the church misses on is like they did not caring about who people are. Like all Jesus asks from people really is to love themselves and love their God. Like it doesn't even like, he's not even specifically saying love my God. He's like, love yourself and love spirit and like just go on in love. And I feel like that's a big lesson for that specific story. Then there's the story in Luke of the shepherd who goes out, he has 99 sheep and he loses one and he leaves, or he has 100 sheep and he leaves the 99 to go rescue the one. And I like that story too, because again, like it's this just going and pursuing and not really caring about what they're getting into, what they're doing, who they are. He just wants to meet people where they're at. And that's like another thing that I don't like. I remember liking that story when I was in the church because, oh, Jesus rescued the lamb and brought it back to church and now he's living a righteous life. But that's like, he just says that he threw it over his shoulders and rejoiced while bringing it back into the town and celebrated with his family that this lamb was found. He didn't celebrate that the lamb changed their life. He didn't celebrate that the lamb is not doing what they were doing before. He's celebrating that the lamb is safe,
Yeah.
not anything else.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
That's like,
those are such good stories. Oh my gosh. I like forgot a little bit. It's been it's been a second since I have like read the Bible, because I have read it in its entirety. Like I made a point to do that. I think it's important to like to understand and like familiarize yourself with like texts, like especially sacred texts from all sorts of religions, whether or not you follow them. I think that like I think we share a lot of that same idea of like omnism, where I believe like everything is real. Like I'm just like, yeah, of course, like I absolutely believe like that is real, like sure, yep, absolutely, because I have a lot of theories about the afterlife and stuff like that, but that is a whole other video. So but that, I'm so happy that you were able to like share that. Thank you so much. So I guess with that, my next question would be like, do you work only with Jesus, or do you kind of, well, I guess you kind of talked about incorporating other like deities, but do you work with any saints or angels or anything like that? Like how would you I don't know, separate out, I guess, like
like who I work with and who
like,
so me personally, like again, there's Jesus witches who work with gods and goddesses from all other pantheons and all other like whatever. I personally feel called to only work within the Abrahamic realm. Also, like that just like plays into my ancestry as well. Like I'm literally from Bethlehem, like that's where my family is from.
awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's cool. At least my dad's side. My mom's Italian, and they all were like Catholic forever too. So it's like literally this is like this runs through my veins. So I felt very called to stay within this pantheon. So with that, I work with the Abrahamic God. So I work with the masculine of that. But then I also work with the divine feminine, because a lot of people don't realize. But firstly, Judaism and Christianity both started out as polytheistic religions. They started off with a specific god and goddess, and this is like something that's really not talked about a lot, but we found through like scholarly evidence and archaeological evidence that there are like paintings of Yahweh, which would be considered to be the Abrahamic god, and then his Asherah, and that would be the divine feminine. There's like pictures, there's paintings of, you know, God with a, you know, a woman, and in the Bible, this woman, this goddess, was reduced to literally a pole. Like you could still find the name Asherah in the Bible. It's in Jeremiah. And she's actually referred to in Jeremiah as the Queen of Heaven, not in a positive light, because obviously this was being written so that you only worship the male aspect, which like, very interesting that we're only worshiping the male. And like, if you think about the Abrahamic religions, aren't they the only like ones that really only worship a male? Every other religion, like I've seen other religions that only worship a female, but that makes more, or like a woman and a man. I shouldn't say male and female, makes it sound like animals, but well, we are, but yeah, it's like, you know, so anyway, in Genesis, it says, there's two stories about the creation of woman. So there's the first creation of woman, which is where people would say that's where Lilith comes from, as Adam's first wife. And then there's the second creation of woman, where God takes Eve out of the rib of Adam. And then that's how, you know, that's why we call woman, because she came out of a man. Oh, but the original story is that both man and woman were created from dust. And it says right there in the Bible, God said, let us make human beings in our image, our, referring to more than one. So for me, I work with the Abrahamic God, the Abrahamic goddess, so I call her Asherah. Some people may refer to the Abrahamic goddess as wisdom or Sophia or the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit should definitely be used by she, her pronouns, because if you read Proverbs 1-8, it talks all about wisdom, like those like specific books, talks all about wisdom, and which is the Holy Spirit's wisdom. And yeah, uses she, her pronouns for the Holy Spirit. But do you think that Christianity worships the divine feminine? No. So that's in my practice, it's become very important to worship a divine feminine and work with a divine feminine, because like I feel like Christians were robbed of that. Like as like believers, we were robbed from our relationship with the divine mom. So it's important for me to start that with her. But then I also, like, outside of that, I do work with Lilith. I work with her to like create more power, learn how to be more confident. I feel like Lilith, especially if you're looking at Lilith as the first wife of Adam, her story is a lot about like not taking shit from a man and not letting like this patriarchal society rule over you. And that's not what I'm here to do. So I work with her for that. And then more recently, I don't do a lot of saint work. I don't do a lot of like archangel work. I know a lot of like Christian witches and Jesus witches are really into that kind of stuff. It's just like at this point in my life, it's like too much for me. I'm very satisfied with like my deities, like with Jesus, with Yahweh, with, you know, Asher. I'm very like spiritually fulfilled there. But I have been inviting Archangel Raphael into my practice. I was in December of 2021, I was rear-ended by a drunk driver, and yeah, crazy. But I sustained a serious whiplash injury as a result from that. And I've been having to do like chiropractic care and acupuncture care for this like every single week, multiple times a week. It's been really like challenging. And I've invited Archangel Raphael into my practice because he's the archangel of healing. So specifically, and I work with him in a very basic way. I don't have like an altar for him. I don't have like items. I know like some people like to do things like that. I'm a mom. I can't do that.
No shame in that. There is no need to have these elaborate. I totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have my workspace. I have my altar where I keep my like diffuser on, but like I can't like, it's just, if I did, my kids would eat the stuff.
Yeah, we don't want that. 50%.
So we just don't do that. But I work with him in the sense where I like, when I'm getting like chiropractic or acupuncture done, I ask for his energy, for him to have his hands in the practitioner's hands. And as like specifically like the acupuncture, as like the guy places the needles, for him to be releasing the energy that needs to be, or not releasing, letting go of the energy that needs to be let go. And I have noticed since I started doing that, literally whenever this dude places these needles in me, I feel like a little, and it's like a little like burst of energy moving around, and it's like crazy. So that's how I work with an archangel. But I also think that's important because a lot of people think like with saint work and like in archangel work, you have to put a lot of effort into it. Like people talk about doing 7-day novenas and having prayer candles and all this stuff. You don't have to do that if you don't feel called to do that. You can literally just call upon their energy and sit with them for a little bit, and they will be more than happy to work with you and more than happy to give you their healing.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of like what their purpose is. Almost like they were, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems as though it's like their purpose to watch over human beings and aid them through the troubles of life. Am I understanding that?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how I interpret it as well. Same, especially with the saints. Like the saints are meant to be examples of holy people.
Right.
So that's how I teach them as my kids. I don't teach them to my kids as like a deity. I kind of teach them as like, this is a really holy person. If we want to get their kind of energy and worship God the way that they did, we can call upon St. Patrick's in my head because it was just St. Patrick's Day. So we could call out St. Patrick and ask him how we can speak our faith more freely. I don't know, like, you know, like that way, like where you can just like call upon them versus like, I know, I've seen like so many people like do offerings and like days and days of putting bread on an altar for like a saint. I'm like, first of all, you're wasting so much bread. Like, that's my first thought. And then secondly, it's like, it does not have to, if you feel called to, or if you want to, or if that's something that feeds you spiritually, do it, you know, that's like do it, but it's not necessary. I don't feel.
Yeah, no, I feel you. And that actually, oh my gosh, you keep like leading into the next question. This is amazing, like with what you're saying. But I guess my next question would be like, what kind of celebrations or, you know, workings do you do the most frequently in your practice? Because, you know I follow like the Wheel of the Year, which is a very like based like pagan thing. Do you see that kind of translating into your practice, or do you follow okay, yeah, I would love to hear all about it.
I definitely follow the Wheel of the Year. We celebrate the 8 Sabbaths. This was the first like year that I was really intentional on doing doing it with my kids as well. So not just like my own practice, but like bringing them into it. Because, you know, if I can raise like little witchy kids, that'd be pretty cool, especially because they're boys. So, you know, like we don't see a lot of like dude witches. So, so I definitely bring them in on that. But like so we do the wheel of the year. So us, like for example, Ostara, we did not celebrate the goddess Ostara because I just don't personally resonate with that story, but we celebrated the rebirth of the earth moving into spring, and we celebrated Aries season and all like the energy and like, you know, the warming up of the climate. And now we went outside barefoot and we looked for like signs of spring and stuff like that. We also celebrated Imbolc, and for Imbolc we did it with tradition, but we also involved St. Bridget because it was like her feast day as well. So like doing things like that are very like easy. And then we also celebrate the Christian holidays. Big one for me is Easter. And I'm really excited for Easter coming up. And I actually don't, so like as like a deconstructed Christian, as somebody who's working with the Abrahamic God in a different way and Jesus in a different way, I don't see Easter as like, oh, the celebration for the atonement of our sins. I think that was BS that was added so that we could all be like controlled and like follow whatever. I don't think God cares like that much about our sin. Like I think he cares, but like not like, it's not the whole reason why he wants to work with us. He wants to work with us so we can be better souls and better people. So for me, when I celebrate Easter, it's now become, instead of like celebrating my sins atoned, I'm saved. No, that's like so like weird. Like just a weird thing to celebrate. But I personally celebrate the lesson that Jesus gave us with the resurrection. And that lesson is that our souls are eternal. Like, yes, the Romans killed him. Yes, he was crucified. Yes, he died. He took his last breath. But his soul did not. His soul stayed and was able to incarnate again into the body of Jesus to bring this lesson to everybody, that we are eternal as soul beings and that we don't just die with death. And that's like when Christians say, oh, death was overcome with Jesus. Yeah, Jesus absolutely showed us that death is something that's not permanent. But now let's not waste that message of his by making it exclusive and like letting everybody celebrate how now we know because of Jesus, our souls are eternal.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. Because like I definitely feel like there is such a focus, especially on Easter, of like the washing away of sins, which I understand is religiously important, and that is kind of like the point, or like that's the way it was, like portrayed to me when I was learning about all of this, when I was going to church. And I felt like it was always my favorite holiday because the candy was great, but I also just like really love springtime, and I never understood until I started like learning about witchcraft and learning about all sorts of stuff like that, about kind of how my connection with the energy of the planet is really kind of what I was picking up on, because around Easter time is usually when, you know, spring is kind of getting into full swing. It's kind of late March, early April, depending on the moon. Which is
another thing. Like they calculate Easter by the full moon.
Yeah,
and you're
right.
gonna tell me that. Okay.
Oh, what a shock. Yeah. But yeah, so I do you feel, I guess, that witchcraft has, like, by infusing that into your practice, the meanings of the holidays has kind of changed for you? Like, is that kind of, or is it? I'm sorry, I know it's a kind of a weird question.
No, it makes, I don't necessarily, like, I definitely think like Imbolc, like that, like is definitely like St. Bridget's Day for us. And we celebrate the midpoint of like spring and winter, but we also like celebrate like this awesome woman of God who, you know, women of God are not necessarily celebrated that much. So, you know, any opportunity that we can celebrate a woman, we do, kind of thing. So, you know, that definitely, but like things like Samhain, getting like into your ancestors and like really like appreciating them. And like with the wheel of the year, like when it like moves into different, like, you know, when Aries season, Capricorn season, I love how I don't like spring, summer, winter, fall, not the astrology, right? We don't celebrate the astrology, we celebrate the season, but we definitely celebrate those seasons. And we'll talk about it, like on the first day of winter, like what are some things you're excited for this winter? I'm excited to go sledding. I'm excited for, you know, New Year's Day. I'm excited for like different like things like that, like versus I don't know if like pagans like would like worship a specific deity during those holidays, but we kind of
It kind of depends. I think that, and everyone's practice is so different. It's hard for me to generalize. I know that on Imbolc and like Ostara and Samhain less so, but definitely like Lunasa and stuff. There is a specific Celtic deity that is celebrated on each of those days. So like Brigid, Aostra, Lu for Lunasa, and then Samhain is more kind of like that element of the triple moon goddess, the crone, that is popularized a lot in Wicca. So yeah, I would say that's definitely how that kind of like differs. But it's cool that you like are taking kind of a especially with your children, like a non-denominational approach as to like understanding the seasons and stuff. I think that's really important and really awesome. I have a lot of friends who like have kids and stuff, so I see them like raising them in like all of these amazing like kind of witchy semi-witchy ways, and they're like teaching their kids about the world and stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. So I commend you. I think that's awesome.
No, they like it, and they're more, I feel like they're more receptive to religion when you kind of allow them to have, like, you know, my son will say things to me that are way more traditional Christian than I believe. And he'll be like, Mom, you only die once and you go to heaven and you're done. I'm like, okay, cool. If that's what you believe, then that's what you believe.
Yeah.
He's like, but you don't believe that? I'm like, no, not necessarily, but it's okay. We're allowed to believe different. You know, and I think that's the big difference between like the way that like maybe you were raised and I was raised, is that there was like one path. Even though my mom was super open, I remember I got into Percy Jackson. I was like, well, maybe these Greek gods are real. And she's like, if you believe like that, I'm gonna take these books away from you. I'm like, okay, Mom, but you know,
right? Yeah, like Harry Potter was like a touchy book. Like I was allowed to read it, but it was like very reluctant. Like yeah. So I guess just to like wrap things up, do you have any kind of like misconceptions about kind of like the Jesus witchcraft, like Christian witch, like anything that you wanted to dispel, or any final thoughts, anything that you kind of wanted to kind of finish up with?
Yeah. So firstly, there's a lot of like BS in the Bible about like witchcraft being a sin. So I just want to break down that for you really quick, because that's not what it meant originally. So specifically when we talk about Paul's texts, love Paul. He messed so many things up in the church. He really caused a ruckus, this poor dude.
Get your shit together, dude.
It's like, but like I wonder, was it really him, or was it just the way people interpreted his words?
Yeah, so it's so hard to say, because it's, I mean, Bible's gone through so many translations. This translated into like literally every single language. So there's no way that you can convince me that something didn't get messed up. Like it's like that game of telephone, you know, where it starts as
somebody messed it up somewhere. But the original word that he wrote for witchcraft was called pharmakia, and some people would equate that to modern medicine. Some people would equate that, obviously a lot of now churches equate that to witchcraft, but in reality the original like text of pharmakia meant that somebody who was poisoning themselves or others, so doing so many drugs that they were making their minds messed up, or administering so many drugs to somebody else that their mind was getting messed up, and it was causing them harm. So that's a big thing too. I feel like a lot of people will say like, oh, witchcraft is harmful. No, not all witchcraft's harmful. Like you have to be very specific in the way that you're practicing if you want it to be harmful to somebody else. So that's like,
like if you want it to be bad. Yeah. Like,
you can do it if you want to.
Right.
I personally don't want to, so I don't. And it's like, that's like what goes along with free will, like, you know, like the whole thing there. But that's really important to me. Is like people should know that like it's a mistranslation. It's same thing like why homosexual was added into the Bible in the 50s. You know, when the original word that was there meant a man who laid with a boy. Like, I don't know about you, but I would respect a God who is against that more than a God who is against, you know.
Like,
I don't know, but I'm just a witch.
Who's to say?
Who knows? But yeah, that's like the biggest part, is like as much as people will tell you that this is a sin, it, you know, they can have their own beliefs, and that's fine if they want to believe that it's a sin, if they want to believe it's against God. But at the end of the day, if you're using your magic and your power to like honor Jesus, and like, you know, before I became a witch, giving to charity like I could give an F about that. Like I did not care at all. But now like it's such an important part of my practice to give to others. But it wasn't before. So I feel like this like opened my eyes to be more like Jesus, if that makes sense, but in my own way that feels genuine. So that's kind of like, I guess that's the final thought is
Yeah.
don't believe everything you read in the
Well, thank
world.
you so much for being so open about your practice and sharing like your wealth of knowledge. I have learned so much from you today. Like just the way you're able just to be like, oh yeah, and then Paul said this, and then they said this. I'm just like, damn, well shit. Like it's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Guys, please go follow Lena, the Jesus Witch, over on all of their social media. Everything will be linked down below. Be kind, learn some things, and I will see you guys later. Bye.